The Southwest flight from Denver to Nashville seemed ordinary at first glance. The gate was bustling with families tugging over stuffed suitcases, business travelers hunched over laptops, and the occasional college kid half asleep, earbuds buried in their ears. Flight attendants moved with practiced smiles, directing the flow of passengers, while the boarding announcements echoed above the chatter. Amid all this, in seat 11F, a small, nondescript girl sat quietly, her knees tucked against the seat in front of her, eyes fixed on the cloud-dappled sky beyond the window. Her name was Maddie Keene, 13 years old, with dark hair pulled into a tight braid and a backpack that looked older than she did, patched in places with faded aviation logos and hand-sewn insignias. No one would have guessed that behind the quiet demeanor and the childlike innocence, there was a history steeped in adrenaline, loss, and danger, a lineage forged in the high-stakes world of military aviation. Passengers passed by her row without much thought, some offering polite smiles, others giving nothing more than a nod. Flight attendants whispered among themselves, occasionally glancing in Maddie's direction. There had been instructions. A special escort had dropped her off at the gate, but no one had seen it leave. Her presence was unusual, yet no one questioned it too loudly. Most assumed she was simply traveling alone, perhaps visiting a relative or returning from a camp. No one suspected the weight she carried in her backpack, or the responsibility written in the stiff line of her shoulders. Maddie's gaze wandered over the cabin. Families chatted, teens texted under the dim overhead lights, and the captain's voice crackled through the intercom, giving the usual pre-flight instructions. But Maddie didn't listen to any of it. Her attention was elsewhere, tuned to the subtle signals she had learned to recognize over the years. The way the flight attendants moved, slightly more cautious than usual, the precise, clipped tone of the captain. There was a tension here, invisible to most passengers, but it prickled her skin like static electricity. She adjusted her backpack on her lap. Inside it was a small, compact metal case, secured with a digital lock and heavy enough that she could feel its weight against her chest even through the padding. The case wasn't just any object. It contained the remnants of her parents' final mission, the only evidence left of their work as Air Force test pilots, and a record so sensitive that it could change the course of operations if it fell into the wrong hands. No adult in the cabin could know what she carried, and if they did, the chaos that would follow could be catastrophic. As the flight attendants began their safety demonstration, Maddie's mind wandered back to the last words her father had spoken to her months ago before he vanished on his mission. Trust your instincts, and never let them see you sweat. Her mother had echoed the same sentiment, but with the softer warmth only she could muster. Maddie, you're small, but you're capable. Remember who you are. Those words had been her shield in countless precarious situations, the mantra she repeated under her breath now, as the engines hummed and the plane pushed back from the gate. Passengers buckled in, overhead bins clicked shut, and the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Maddie felt the vibration through the soles of her shoes and into her chest. Her hand grazed the metal tag on her backpack again, a small engraved plate that read E5K VB72. A code that no one but her and her parents fully understood, a call sign that had once commanded attention in the most elite fighter squadrons. Now in this crowded commercial airliner it was merely a hidden insignia, but that would change soon. She could feel it in the air. The captain's voice returned, calm but tense. Ladies and gentlemen will be taking off shortly. Please remain seated and ensure your seatbelts are fastened. His tone was standard, professional, but Maddie detected the subtle undercurrent, an urgency barely masked behind practiced restraint. Somewhere in the background, on an unlisted frequency, she could hear faint electronic signals, the telltale hum of a military radar scan, barely perceptible but unmistakable to her trained ears. She wasn't supposed to hear it, but she did. The plane lifted into the sky, the city shrinking beneath a quilt of winter clouds. Maddie leaned closer to the window, staring at the orange and gray horizon. She could feel the adrenaline starting to rise, a slow burn in her chest that mirrored the tension in the cockpit. Something was happening above them, something that required precision, discipline, and knowledge she wasn't supposed to possess yet somehow had inherited. Her pulse quickened. Her stomach knotted. And for the first time in weeks, a thrill of fear coursed through her like electricity. Passengers around her remained blissfully unaware, headphones in, smartphones in hand. But Maddie knew better. She had been trained informally in the ways of observation, in reading signals, in understanding patterns that would escape ordinary adults. Her parents had taught her through stories and practice missions in virtual simulators, never expecting she would be tested so soon in the real world. But now, every lesson mattered. Every detail mattered. The first turbulence hit, a minor bump almost laughable to most passengers, but Maddie's eyes narrowed. The plane jolted again, harder this time. A few passengers murmured and tightened their seatbelts, but Maddie's body reacted differently. She felt it in her chest, in the subtle tilt of the cabin, in the way the engines seemed to pitch slightly off rhythm. Her instincts screamed. Something was approaching, something that had noticed her. The captain's voice cut through again, tighter this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing minor airspace interference. Please remain seated." Interference. Maddie knew better. That wasn't random turbulence. That wasn't a weather glitch. Someone or something was aware of this flight, aware of her presence. She traced a mental checklist her mother had drilled into her memory. Identify, observe, prepare. The overhead lights flickered briefly. Passengers gasped, some looking around nervously. A young boy in 12A clutched his mother's hand, his eyes wide. Maddie didn't flinch. Her eyes scanned the wing outside the window, and then just for a split second she saw them, two black shapes slicing through the clouds in formation, distant but precise. Jets, Raptors, F-22s, they were real and they were headed directly toward her. Her throat went dry. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, heart hammering. This was not a coincidence. The captain didn't know it yet, and the passengers certainly didn't, but those jets were here for a reason. And the reason was her. The flight attendant passing by paused mid-step, frowning at her. Maddie forced herself to sit back, feigning the posture of a nervous child. But her mind raced. The code on her backpack, the tag she traced with trembling fingers, E5KVB72 wasn't just an identifier. It was her call sign, a name that once made seasoned pilots snap to attention. And now, at 32,000 feet in the cabin of a commercial airliner, it was about to resurface. A distant rumble reached the cabin, almost imperceptible, but Maddie felt it in her bones. She closed her eyes briefly, remembering her father's voice. "If they're coming for you, don't panic. Control what you can, and always be ready." Her fingers tightened on the strap of her backpack. She was just a kid in seat 11F, but not for long. The captain's voice broke the silence again, sharper this time. "We've been contacted by military command. There may be a need for verification of a passenger on board. I repeat, we have an unusual situation in progress. Please remain calm." Maddie's eyes shot open. She wasn't the only one who had noticed. Two F-22 Raptors were closing fast, formation tight, their pilots scanning the airspace with precision that only elite aviators could achieve. Her pulse surged, a mixture of fear and adrenaline. This wasn't training. This wasn't a game. And then, just as the plane leveled off above the cloud line, the realization hit her in a cold wave. They were looking for her. Not for any other passenger, not for a seat number, not for a mistaken identity. They were looking for the girl in 11F. Her hand drifted to her backpack again. Her father's and mother's legacy rested inside. Her own identity, her survival, and possibly the lives of everyone on this plane were about to hinge on the decisions she would make in the next moments. Maddie inhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. The F-22s were closing. She could see the glint of sunlight on their wings through the scattered clouds, and she knew, with a certainty that made her chest tighten, that her life, and the truth she carried, would never be ordinary again. She swallowed hard. Her small hand tightened around the strap of her backpack. Her eyes lifted toward the cockpit, then back to the wing, and in that instant a tiny spark of recognition lit her expression. They knew. They recognized her call sign. And Maddie Keene, a kid in seat 11F, realized that everything was about to change. The hum of the engines masked a different kind of noise, one only Maddie could feel. A subtle vibration, almost imperceptible, ran through the fuselage. Most passengers were oblivious, buried in movies, games, or chatter. But Maddie's eyes were sharp, scanning the clouds beyond her window. She traced the sky with a practiced gaze, remembering the drills her parents had forced her to repeat over and over, always looking, always scanning, always anticipating. The first Raptor had maintained a steady position, a dark silhouette against the glowing clouds, wings perfectly aligned. Maddie's chest tightened. The second jet emerged moments later, forming a diamond pattern with the first. Formation flying was more than skill, it was a statement, a message, and Maddie understood it instantly. They were not here to escort the flight for safety. They were here for her. She hugged her backpack closer. Inside was the small, metallic case holding the last flight logs of her parents, a record encrypted in ways most adults couldn't comprehend. This wasn't just about a kid on a plane. It was about secrets so classified, so deadly, that the government had tried to erase them completely. And now, in the open sky, those secrets were calling attention to her. The captain's voice came over the PA again, a little more urgent this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received a message from military command. There may be a need to verify a passenger on board. Please remain seated and calm. We are taking every precaution." Passengers murmured nervously, glancing at one another. Some whispered about special operations, while others rolled their eyes, assuming it was an exaggerated announcement. But Maddie knew it wasn't exaggeration. Every syllable, every pause, every tone contained a precision that only someone who had spent years in the Air Force could replicate. A flight attendant, clipboard in hand, walked down the aisle toward Maddie. Her steps were careful but brisk. The woman's eyes widened slightly when she reached row 11. "Excuse me, do you have a designation, Echo 5 Keene?" Her voice wavered ever so slightly. Maddie's heart nearly stopped. That was her call sign, the one she had carried secretly since her parents' disappearance. She swallowed and lifted a trembling hand. "Yes," she said quietly. The attendant's eyes went wide, and she looked over her shoulder, whispering urgently into a concealed headset. Maddie noticed the sudden shift in atmosphere. Crew members exchanged glances. Passengers leaned forward with curiosity, but Maddie's focus was laser-sharp. The two F-22s outside were tightening formation, adjusting their flight paths as if reading the plane's movements with intimate familiarity. The captain spoke again, but his voice now carried an unmistakable tension. "Flight attendants, prepare to escort the passenger to the cockpit. Military verification is required. This is a controlled situation. Keep everyone calm." Maddie felt her stomach drop. She wasn't just a kid traveling alone. She wasn't someone who could be reassured with seat belts and oxygen masks. She was a walking target, carrying information that could destabilize powerful forces if it fell into the wrong hands. A sudden bump shook the plane. The passengers gasped, some clutching their armrests. Maddie's eyes darted to the window, scanning the cloud line for any anomaly. The turbulence felt deliberate. The plane wasn't reacting naturally, it was being watched. She could sense it, the subtle interference in its systems, the tiny lurches that didn't match normal flight behavior. The flight attendant approached her again, now kneeling to meet her eye level. "Ma'am, young lady, military command requires you to come forward. Please bring your belongings." Maddie's hand hovered over her backpack. She had trained for situations like this, in virtual simulators and private drills at her parents' home, but this was different. The stakes were real. Her fingers brushed the cold metal of the case inside. A sudden wave of fear and determination crashed over her. If she made one wrong move, it could be catastrophic. She nodded once. "Okay," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, trying to appear small, unthreatening, just a kid traveling alone. Every step toward the front of the plane was measured, careful, but inside, her mind was racing at the speed of a fighter jet. Passengers turned, whispering, some pointing. "Is she military?" someone asked. Another voice said, "Why are they moving her forward?" Maddie ignored it all, her eyes fixed on the cockpit door ahead, her mind replaying every lesson her parents had drilled into her memory. Observe, calculate, control what you can, trust your instincts. As she reached the first officer, she saw the envelope in his hands, a sealed federal envelope marked with the unmistakable insignia of NORAD. He hesitated slightly, scanning her face. "Are you Echo 5 Keen?" he asked, voice tight. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He opened the envelope and peeked inside, then glanced back at her. They want confirmation." His eyes betrayed a mix of disbelief and awe. "You're a kid." Maddie swallowed. "I know." The lead flight attendant nodded to him. "Raptors are in position," she said. "They're waiting for confirmation that she's aboard." Outside the window, Maddie caught the glint of sunlight off the F-22's wings. One of the pilots lifted his visor and looked directly at her. It was as though recognition passed through the clouds themselves, a silent acknowledgement that only she and those pilots could understand. Her pulse quickened. They weren't here to scare the passengers. They were here for her. The captain spoke again, tension breaking slightly through his calm exterior. "We're going to need cockpit access," he said. "Flight control will coordinate with the Raptors. Ma'am, Miss Keen, can you?" He trailed off, clearly realizing the gravity of the situation. Maddie nodded and moved forward, feeling the eyes of every passenger and crew member on her. They saw only a child, but she wasn't just a child. She was a trained observer, a keeper of secrets, a legacy carrier of something far bigger than anyone in this cabin could imagine. The cockpit door opened, and she stepped inside. The first officer barely had time to guide her to a small area where she could stand safely but close enough to interact with the controls if needed. Maddie didn't touch anything yet. She simply observed, memorized, and waited. "Confirmation code?" the first officer asked. Maddie's heart hammered. She hesitated, then pressed her fingers to the metal tag on her backpack. "Viper Blue 72, she whispered. It was a code her parents had drilled into her memory, a code that identified her as the rightful holder of the encrypted flight logs, the call sign only recognized by the highest echelons of the Air Force and NORAD. Instantly, a response crackled through the cockpit comms. "Copy, Echo 5, authorization verified. Maintain altitude, hold position. Raptors, confirm visual." Maddie's chest tightened. The pilots outside snapped to precise formation. The jets moved in perfect sync, flanking the commercial plane, their wings casting brief shadows across the fuselage. The precision, the discipline, the deadly focus of those pilots, it was awe-inspiring. It was also terrifying. Passengers pressed their faces to the windows now, smartphones raised, oblivious to what was happening. They saw only 2 fighter jets escorting a commercial flight. They didn't know the significance of the girl standing just feet away from the cockpit controls, a 13-year-old with a call sign that could change everything. Maddie took a slow breath. Her mind raced, replaying the lessons her parents had taught her, the simulations she had memorized, the scenarios she had practiced countless times. One misstep, one wrong signal, one hesitation, and the consequences could be catastrophic. But she wasn't panicking. She had to stay calm, stay observant, and above all, stay alive. A sudden sharp vibration ran through the plane. Maddie stiffened. It wasn't turbulence, it was deliberate. The pilots outside reacted instantly, one banking slightly, wings slicing through the clouds like knives. Maddie's stomach dropped. Someone was approaching, someone who didn't belong. She pressed her forehead to the window, squinting against the glare of the sun on the jet's canopy. A third aircraft appeared, sleek, unmarked, and moving fast, too precise. The kind of aircraft designed for infiltration, not escort. Maddie's pulse spiked. She recognized the formation pattern immediately. It was a signature she had studied in her parents' flight logs, the one they had feared most. The cockpit fell into tense silence. The first officer muttered, "That's no friendly." The captain cursed under his breath. Passengers behind them remained oblivious, but Maddie didn't need to explain. She had seen this pattern before. She knew what it meant. Her fingers instinctively brushed the edge of her backpack. The metallic case inside hummed faintly against her palm, the weight a reminder of what she carried. She wasn't just a kid anymore. She was the target, the key, the only person who could identify and protect the contents inside. The F-22 pilots outside adjusted their formation, moving to intercept. Maddie's lips pressed into a thin line. This was it. The game had begun. And in less than a minute, the entire plane, every passenger and her own fragile life would hang in the balance. Her heart raced. She glanced back at the passengers. Innocent lives, unaware of the danger descending upon them, their fates unknowingly tied to the girl in 11F. Maddie swallowed, took a deep breath, and braced herself for the first move. Because the moment had arrived. The cockpit was silent except for the low hum of the plane's engines and the faint crackle of communications. Maddie stood near the first officer, clutching her backpack, eyes darting between the instruments and the window. Outside, the two F-22 Raptors maintained flawless formation, one slightly ahead, the other flanking the commercial plane. But it wasn't the precision flying that made Maddie's pulse spike. It was recognition. The lead pilot's eyes, visible through the visor, locked on hers for the briefest moment, and she felt it. Acknowledgement, respect, shock. She wasn't just a kid. She was Echo 5 Keen, and the pilots knew it instantly. The call sign was more than a name. It was a legacy, a code tied to her parents, both elite Air Force test pilots whose final mission had ended in tragedy. That mission had been classified, erased from records, and yet somehow Maddie had inherited the final piece of their work. The metallic case in her backpack contained data that powerful people would kill for. The first officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the envelope in his hands. "Do you have the authorization key?" he asked, his voice almost hushed. Maddie's hand hovered over the backpack strap, fingers brushing the cold metal tag. "Viper Blue 72. "Yes," she said quietly but firmly. He blinked. "You're a kid, how?" Maddie's lips pressed into a thin line. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, even as a child. She would not falter. "I know what I'm doing," she replied. Her voice carried a confidence that seemed impossible for someone so small, so young, but experience, fear, and instinct had forged it. The first officer exhaled sharply. "Copy that. Military command confirms authentication. Raptors verify visual." Outside, the lead F-22 pilot's head snapped up slightly, a subtle tilt that indicated recognition. The secondary pilot mirrored the movement. They were not simply acknowledging her presence. They were confirming that she was the rightful holder of this call sign. Every calculation, every maneuver they executed now accounted for her. Their discipline had been precise, almost mechanical, but now it carried emotion, surprise, astonishment, and perhaps even awe. Back in the cabin, passengers murmured, sensing something extraordinary was happening, though they could not comprehend its magnitude. A man in 12B raised his phone. "Hey, are those fighter jets following us?" The first officer ignored him, keeping his focus on Maddie. "You're going to need to confirm the code," he said. Maddie took a deep breath. This was it, the moment she had anticipated yet dreaded. "Viper Blue 72, she whispered again, pressing the metal tag on her backpack to activate the encryption sequence. Inside, the metallic case hummed faintly. The encryption signal transmitted subtly, confirming her identity. The cockpit crackled with a response. "Authentication confirmed, priority access granted, flight log secure, Raptors maintain protective formation." A shiver ran down Maddie's spine. Her call sign, her parents' call sign, was recognized. Her presence had snapped these elite pilots into instant, unquestioning attention. And she realized something chilling. The moment she had stepped onto this flight, she had become a target, a key, and now an acknowledged authority in a world she barely understood. The first officer leaned back, exhaling slowly. I can't believe it, you're a kid." "I'm not just a kid," Maddie said, voice unwavering. "I'm the last record keeper. If they take this," she tapped the metallic case, "everything my parents worked for, everything they tried to protect, disappears." Outside, the F-22s adjusted their formation slightly, scanning the sky. Maddie's eyes followed them, noting every subtle movement. A new pattern was emerging, something the first officer hadn't noticed yet. And Maddie realized with a sudden, stomach-churning clarity that another aircraft was approaching. It wasn't part of the escort. It was fast, sleek, unmarked, and highly precise. Her pulse spiked. "They're here," she muttered. The first officer stiffened. "Who's here?" Maddie didn't answer. Instead, she pressed closer to the window, peering through the clouds. The new aircraft moved with a speed and intent that made her gut clench. This was no random plane. This was deliberate, and it was coming for her. She turned to the captain, who had just stepped in, watching her closely. "Sir, there's a third aircraft," she said, voice steady. "It's not friendly. We need to maneuver now." The captain's eyes widened, but he trusted the authority Maddie carried. How do you know that?" Maddie's lips pressed together. "I know the patterns," she said, thinking of her parents' flight logs, the simulations, the tactical exercises they had drilled into her memory. Every second counted. Every decision had consequences that could ripple across the sky. The F-22s outside reacted instantly. The lead jet banked sharply, moving ahead to intercept the approaching aircraft, while the secondary Raptor flanked Maddie's plane, forming a protective triangle. Their precision was terrifying to watch. Inside, passengers had begun pressing to the windows, murmuring in confusion and awe. They saw jets in formation and sensed urgency, but could not comprehend the truth. A 13-year-old girl standing in the cockpit, recognized as Echo 5 Keen, had just commanded the respect of two of the nation's most elite fighter pilots. Maddie's chest tightened. The approaching jet gained speed, closing distance with alarming rapidity. She could see the sharp angles of its wings, the matte gray of its fuselage. It was sleek, designed for infiltration or combat, and she knew immediately that this was not a coincidence. Whoever had sent this plane knew exactly where she was and exactly what she carried. The first officer's hands trembled slightly over the controls. What do we do?" Maddie took a deep breath. "We hold altitude, the Raptors will intercept, and we don't let anyone near this plane, anyone, not until it's safe." The cockpit crackled as communications came from the F-22s. Raptor 1 to Echo 5 Keen, visual confirmed. Maintaining protective pattern. Threat identified. Engaging. Maddie's heart thumped in her chest. She had always trained for simulations, for exercises, for hypothetical emergencies. But this was real. Her parents' world had come alive in front of her eyes, and she was at the center of it. The approaching aircraft veered slightly, attempting to break formation. Maddie noticed the subtle signals, the way its movements betrayed its intentions, the timing of its maneuvers. She had inherited her parents' instinct, their precision, their tactical mind. And now she had to use it to survive. The Raptor jets responded instantly, flanking the intruder, using formation tactics Maddie had studied in every detail of her parents' flight logs. The maneuvers were textbook, yet executed with the deadly precision that only elite pilots could achieve. She watched, analyzing every shift, every angle, every flash of metal in the sun. "Miss Keen," the first officer said, voice tight with disbelief, You're incredible. I've never seen anyone read the sky like that, especially someone your age." Maddie didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed outside, calculating, observing, anticipating. She knew the intruder wasn't finished. They hadn't come just for confirmation. They wanted the metallic case. They wanted her parents' work, and she wouldn't give it up. The cabin behind them was tense but unaware of the true stakes. Passengers whispered. Some prayed, others recorded video. No one understood that the fate of classified intelligence, and possibly the lives of everyone on the plane, rested in the hands of a 13-year-old girl. The intruder jet surged closer, attempting to cut off their path. Maddie's fingers brushed her backpack. She whispered to herself, "Focus. Observe. Control what you can." Her parents' voices echoed in her mind, lessons drilled in countless practice runs. Anticipate the enemy, maintain composure, never underestimate the value of your instincts. The F-22s adjusted, one rolling sharply to force the intruder upward, the other maintaining the protective pattern around the commercial jet. The cockpit trembled slightly with the maneuvers. Maddie's chest tightened. Every movement mattered. A single misstep could allow the intruder to get too close, and the consequences would be catastrophic. Then came the signal, a flash of recognition, a subtle movement from the lead F-22 pilot. Maddie realized they weren't just protecting her, they were acknowledging her authority, her right to command the scenario. The call sign she had carried silently for years had just become active, and with that, the intruder hesitated. Maddie's mind raced. She was small, but she was not powerless. The metallic case in her backpack, the F-22s, the knowledge she carried, it all converged in this moment. She was no longer just a kid in seat 11F, she was Echo 5 keen, and the world outside the clouds was finally paying attention. Her pulse surged, adrenaline flooding her system. And then, just as she braced for the next move, the intruder made a sudden, unexpected maneuver, diving sharply toward the commercial plane. Maddie's eyes widened. This was it. The intruder jet dove with terrifying precision, slicing through clouds like a phantom intent on destruction. Maddie's heart hammered against her ribs, but she stayed rooted in the cockpit, every fiber of her being tuned to observation. This was no ordinary threat. It was a deliberate attempt to reach the plane, to seize the metallic case that contained her parents' final mission logs. Every instinct screamed danger, but her training, inherited from the most elite Air Force pilots in history, told her to remain calm. Panic would kill them all. Outside the window, the F-22 Raptors reacted instantly. The lead jet accelerated, cutting the intruder's path with surgical precision, banking sharply to force it upward. The secondary Raptor mirrored the maneuver, creating a protective wedge around the commercial plane. Maddie's pulse raced as she tracked the movements, calculating angles, speeds, and trajectories the way her parents had taught her. She realized, even in her terror, that she could predict the intruder's moves. Every maneuver, every hesitation, every subtle signal in the sky was a message, a pattern she could decipher. The first officer glanced at her, awe evident in his eyes. You're reading this like a veteran pilot," he muttered. "How?" Maddie didn't answer. Her eyes never left the intruder. The plane had appeared suddenly, unmarked, unannounced, and deadly. She had seen this type of formation in her parents' encrypted logs. Their final exercises had always included simulations of rogue aircraft interception, coded threats, and unauthorized pursuit. Every instinct she had was screaming that this was not a drill. It was real, and it was personal. The cabin behind them was oblivious to the precise terror outside. Passengers pressed faces to windows, smartphones raised, whispering, pointing. "Are those fighter jets ours?" one woman asked. "What's going on?" Another man muttered, "Is this normal?" Maddie barely noticed. Their lives were in their hands, but her focus was on the intruder. She pressed her forehead to the glass briefly, tracing its trajectory, memorizing its patterns, and signaling mentally to the F-22s. They were elite pilots, but they had just recognized her call sign. They didn't yet know how much she understood. "Miss Keene," the first officer said, voice tight, "we need to maneuver. Do you have a suggestion?" Maddie swallowed hard. "We hold altitude, but prepare for evasive action if it tries to breach the cabin. The F-22s will intercept, but we can't give it a straight path." The captain nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He keyed the mic to the cockpit communications. "All crew maintain positions. No sudden movements. Keep everyone calm." Maddie's fingers brushed the metallic case in her backpack. The encrypted flight logs were secure for now, but the intruder's intent was clear. This wasn't about curiosity. This wasn't about mistaken identity. They wanted it, and they knew she had it. The thought tightened her chest, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. She had learned to compartmentalize fear, to let the adrenaline sharpen her mind instead of overwhelming it. The lead F-22 pilot made a subtle banking movement. Maddie recognized the signal immediately, a coordinated intercept. The intruder reacted almost instinctively, attempting to break through the formation. Maddie's pulse quickened as she predicted its trajectory, noting the precise angles, the speed, the tilt of its wings. She whispered under her breath, "If it goes for the left flank, bank sharply right, maintain altitude." The pilots outside executed her mental commands almost perfectly, as if she were an invisible hand guiding their maneuvers. The intruder faltered slightly, forced to adjust, unable to reach its target. Maddie's lips pressed together in grim satisfaction. She had made the difference. But relief didn't last long. The intruder jet suddenly released a flare, bright and blinding against the soft glow of the clouds. Maddie's stomach dropped. They were escalating. This was no simple intercept. This was combat. "Brace for evasive," the captain muttered under his breath. The commercial plane shuddered as the pilots executed a sharp bank, rolling slightly to avoid the flare. Passengers gripped armrests, wide-eyed, screaming in shock. Maddie's heart raced, but she stayed focused, eyes locked on the intruder through the window. Every move, every release of flares, every shift in the sky was a puzzle she had to solve instantly. The first officer turned to her, incredulous. "You're directing them. You're actually directing the Raptors." Maddie swallowed. "I'm keeping them safe," she said simply. "If I don't, we all die." Outside, the lead Raptor executed a calculated maneuver, forcing the intruder to overshoot slightly. Maddie's eyes tracked its every move, calculating distance, speed, and angle. Her mind raced faster than the engines outside. Every second was life or death. She felt her parents' presence in every decision, their voices guiding her, their instincts flowing through her veins. The intruder jet attempted another approach, banking sharply toward the plane's rear. Maddie's pulse thundered in her ears. She keyed into the cockpit microphone instinctively. "Raptor 1, flank left. Raptor 2, intercept rear. Maintain altitude." The F-22 pilots executed the commands flawlessly, adjusting in microseconds. Maddie's chest tightened with a mix of terror and exhilaration. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was orchestrating the defense. Her parents' legacy had come alive in her hands, and the sky itself was the battlefield. The intruder, realizing its approach was blocked, attempted a feint, banking toward the opposite side. Maddie anticipated it, eyes narrowing. "No," she whispered. "Not today." The Raptors responded instantly, forming a wedge to guide the intruder away from the plane. The intruder released another flare and the cabin shuddered violently. A few passengers screamed. Maddie ignored them, focusing on the enemy outside, memorizing every pattern, every signature, every tactic. "Miss Keene," the first officer said, voice tight, "you're incredible. How can someone your age do this?" Maddie pressed her lips together. "I've had training," she said quietly, "and I've seen the enemy before." Her mind flashed to the encrypted logs, to her parents' final mission, to the secret exercises they had forced her to practice repeatedly. Every lesson was real now. Every simulation had prepared her for this exact moment. The lead F-22 pilot executed a daring maneuver, forcing the intruder jet into a sharp climb. Maddie watched, mentally guiding each movement. The intruder's speed faltered, its path now under control of the Raptors. The commercial plane stabilized. Relief rippled through her body, but she remained vigilant. The captain exhaled. "We're holding for now." But Maddie knew the threat was not gone. The intruder would return. It would not stop until it reached its target, the metallic case, the flight logs, her parents' legacy. She glanced down at the backpack, gripping it tightly. Whoever was behind this would escalate. They had resources, training, and determination, and she was all that stood in their way. A sudden flash outside drew her gaze, a signal from the lead Raptor pilot. He tilted his head, canopy glinting in the sunlight. Recognition, respect, astonishment. The pilots outside had not expected a child to command such precision, such instinct, such tactical foresight. Maddie swallowed hard. Her pulse raced. She was small, but she was not powerless. She had become the key to the survival of everyone on this plane. She had become Echo 5 keen, recognized, acknowledged, and now fully engaged in the fight above the clouds. And yet, as the plane leveled, and the intruder faltered under the Raptor's guidance, Maddie knew one undeniable truth. This was only the beginning. The intruder would return. And the next move could be lethal. Maddie pressed her forehead briefly to the cockpit window, watching the Raptors flanking the plane with deadly precision. The intruder jet had faltered, but Maddie knew better than to relax. It had come this close once, and it would come again, faster, smarter. Every instinct in her body screamed that the next move could be fatal. The metallic case in her backpack felt heavier than ever, a reminder of the responsibility she carried. Her parents' final mission, erased from public record, depended on her protection. It contained data so sensitive that it could alter operations at the highest levels of the Air Force. It wasn't just information, it was a legacy, and she was its guardian. "Miss Keene," the first officer said, voice low, "the Raptors, they're waiting for you to confirm guidance. You need to direct them." Maddie's pulse spiked. She had anticipated this moment, but seeing it actualized brought a mix of fear and adrenaline she couldn't suppress. She swallowed hard, pressed a finger to the metal tag on her backpack, and whispered, "Raptor 1, adjust 3 degrees left. Raptor 2, flank right. Maintain altitude." The pilots responded instantly. The lead jet banked slightly, its wings cutting through the clouds with lethal elegance. The secondary jet mirrored the movement, closing the gap around the commercial plane. Maddie watched, her small frame tense, every heartbeat synchronized with the drones of engines outside. Passengers pressed their faces to the windows, oblivious to the tactical ballet taking place in the sky. To them, it was simply an impressive air show. But Maddie's mind processed every movement, every shift, every calculated adjustment. This was war above the clouds, and she was its unlikely commander. Suddenly, the intruder jet reappeared, faster, more aggressive, banking sharply toward the plane's rear. Maddie's stomach dropped. This was no practice run. The pilot was trying to break through. She pressed a hand to her backpack, feeling the cold hum of the metallic case inside. "They're going for the rear," she muttered. "Raptor 2, intercept immediately. Lead, maintain forward pressure." Outside, the Raptors responded with surgical precision. The intruder was forced upward, momentarily losing alignment with the plane. Maddie's mind raced. She knew she had to anticipate the next move, and she had mere seconds to act. Her eyes scanned the intruder's movements, memorizing every angle, every wing tilt, every minute adjustment. She whispered calculations under her breath, adjustments so rapid she barely recognized her own thought process. The Raptors executed her commands flawlessly, but Maddie knew the intruder would test them again. They were adaptive, relentless, and they knew exactly what they were after. "Miss Keene," the first officer said, voice tense, "this is incredible. You're directing fighters in real time. You're extraordinary." Maddie didn't respond. Her focus remained on the threat outside. "Raptor 1, anticipate a feint left. Raptor 2, maintain rear coverage. Do not break formation." The lead Raptor adjusted slightly, the intruder jet forced to climb abruptly, missing the plane by mere feet. Maddie's heart raced, but she remained calm, observing, calculating, anticipating. She could see patterns in the intruder's maneuvers, the subtle tells that indicated its next move. Her parents had drilled her to notice these signs, to anticipate an enemy's intentions, and now she relied on every ounce of that training. The cockpit shuddered again as turbulence hit, amplified by the rapid maneuvers. Passengers screamed, gripping armrests, faces pale. Maddie didn't flinch. She had to remain steady, a calm anchor for the pilots, the crew, and everyone on board. The first officer whispered, "I've never seen anyone do this ever. Not in simulations, not in real combat. And you're 13. Maddie's eyes were fixed on the intruder. Age doesn't matter. Focus does. Precision does. Observation does. She adjusted her stance slightly, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. Do not let it reach the plane. Do not give it a chance. The lead Raptor pilot made a subtle adjustment, a movement Maddie had anticipated. The intruder, realizing its path was blocked, attempted a sharp climb and roll, trying to disorient the escorts. Maddie's pulse spiked. She calculated speed, angle, altitude, wind drift, all within a heartbeat. Raptor 1, anticipate climb. Raptor 2, align wedge. Maintain visual on intruder. The pilots outside executed flawlessly. The intruder faltered, caught in the wedge, unable to reach the commercial plane. Maddie's breath hitched. She had made the difference. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a commander in the sky, orchestrating a lethal dance between fighter jets. But relief didn't last. The intruder jet suddenly released a second flare, bright, blinding, cutting across the sunlight and scattering reflections through the cockpit. The commercial plane shuddered violently. Passengers screamed in terror. Maddie's stomach dropped, but her mind focused. This was a test, another move in the deadly chess game unfolding above the clouds. She pressed a finger to the metal tag on her backpack, whispering under her breath, "Raptors, anticipate flare. Evasive maneuvers now." The F-22s executed the commands perfectly. The intruder adjusted, banking abruptly, losing its approach angle. The commercial plane leveled, stabilized. Maddie allowed herself a brief, controlled exhale. She had survived this round, but she knew more challenges were coming. The first officer leaned back, visibly shaken. You saved this plane, saved everyone. He trailed off, realizing words could not capture the gravity of the moment. Maddie didn't respond. Her eyes were already scanning the clouds again. Another flicker of motion, subtle but deliberate, caught her attention. A second intruder, or the same one preparing another strike. Her pulse raced. The sky was alive with danger, and she had to be ready. She glanced down at the metallic case, feeling its weight, the significance of what she carried pressing against her chest. Whoever was pursuing her knew exactly what she had, and they would not stop. The stakes had escalated beyond anything a child should face, beyond anything a commercial pilot or flight attendant could comprehend. This was no longer just a flight. It was a battlefield, and Maddie was at its center. The lead Raptor pilot tilted his head again, glancing toward her through the canopy. Maddie's eyes met his. Recognition, respect, disbelief, all flashed in that instant. He knew what she had done, what she was capable of, and perhaps, for the first time, he realized that a child had just outmaneuvered a threat elite pilots would struggle with. Maddie pressed her lips together. She wasn't done. She had to ensure the metallic case remained secure, the flight logs protected, and the passengers safe. Her hands hovered over the backpack strap, ready for any eventuality. Suddenly, the intruder jet made a final, desperate attempt. A dive aimed at the commercial plane's rear, faster and more aggressive than before. Maddie's chest tightened. She pressed herself against the cockpit wall, eyes locked on the threat. "Raptors," she whispered urgently, "final intercept. Push it up, force it away. Maintain formation. Do not let it reach the plane." Outside, the F-22s executed flawlessly. The intruder, unable to break through, climbed sharply, banking away in frustration. Maddie's chest heaved with adrenaline. She had commanded the sky. She had saved everyone on board. The cabin erupted into whispers and gasps. Passengers had witnessed a dance of jets through the clouds, unaware of the intelligence and authority behind the movements. They would tell stories of the heroic fighter jets, never realizing the child in 11F had guided them, directed them, and orchestrated the entire defense. Maddie slumped slightly, exhausted but alert. Her fingers lingered over the backpack strap, feeling the metallic case safe and intact. She had survived. She had saved lives. She had asserted her authority in a world that hadn't expected a child to wield it. But as she looked back at the clouds, the horizon, and the fleeing intruder jet, she knew one undeniable truth. This was far from over. The attackers would regroup. They would come back. And next time, the stakes would be even higher. Maddie closed her eyes briefly, drawing a steadying breath. She wasn't just a kid in seat 11F anymore. She was Echo 5 keen, recognized, respected, and fully responsible for the legacy of her parents. The sky had acknowledged her authority, and she had risen to the challenge. But even as relief surged through her, a flicker of unease settled in. Somewhere beyond the clouds, someone was watching, waiting, calculating. And Maddie knew the next encounter would demand every ounce of her courage, every shred of her training, and every instinct she had inherited from her parents. The metallic case hummed faintly against her chest. The weight of history, responsibility, and danger pressed down on her. She wasn't just protecting data, she was protecting a truth that could change everything. And somewhere in the sky above, the threat still lingered, unseen but not gone. Maddie's small hands clenched the metallic case in her backpack as the hum of the engines vibrated through the cockpit. She had survived the intruder's first assault, but instinct told her the danger wasn't over. Above the clouds, the sky was a chessboard, and her adversary had only just revealed its first move. The Raptors maintained formation, vigilant and precise, but they relied on her guidance now. Maddie could feel their eyes on her through the canopy, a mixture of awe, disbelief, and silent trust. The lead pilot, who had initially recognized her call sign, adjusted his flight path slightly, signaling readiness for whatever she instructed next. "Miss Keene," the first officer said, voice tight, "we need to know, do you anticipate another strike?" Maddie pressed her forehead against the glass, scanning the horizon. "Yes," she said quietly, eyes narrowing. "They're regrouping. The intruder wasn't acting alone. There's another aircraft out there, and it's waiting for the perfect moment to strike." The captain swallowed hard, realizing that this was no ordinary mid-air threat. Another plane. Do we have the capability to defend against two intruders at once? Maddie's lips pressed into a thin line. "We do, but we have to act fast. The Raptors will need precise guidance. Timing is everything." She tapped the metallic case lightly. Its hum was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was a reminder of what she carried and what was at stake. Outside, the F-22s adjusted their formation subtly, moving in response to her silent calculations. Maddie could sense their movements, anticipate the intruder's reactions, and direct the defense in real time. Her pulse hammered in her chest, adrenaline sharpening every sense. She wasn't just a passenger. She was the strategist, the commander, and the guardian of secrets that could alter the balance of power. A flicker on the radar display drew her attention. Maddie's eyes widened. Another aircraft had appeared, far off but closing rapidly. Sleek, unmarked, calculated. Its trajectory suggested a deliberate interception, an attempt to flank the commercial plane from above. "Raptors," Maddie whispered urgently, "double-check the rear. They're coming in from above, high velocity. Maintain wedge formation, anticipate vertical approach." The pilots outside responded instantly. The lead jet banked upward slightly, flanking the new threat, while the secondary jet mirrored the movement to cover the rear. The commercial plane shook as turbulence intensified, but Maddie remained focused, every heartbeat measured, every calculation precise. "Miss Keene," the first officer said, voice strained with disbelief, "you're coordinating air combat. You're 13. How can you do this?" Maddie didn't answer. Her eyes tracked the intruder, memorizing its movements, its patterns, its intentions. "Focus," she whispered under her breath. "Observe, calculate, act." The first intruder had been repelled, but the second one was more aggressive, banking sharply in a tight maneuver toward the plane's upper left quadrant. Maddie's stomach tightened. She could see its target, the rear section of the fuselage where her backpack rested discreetly against her chest. This was no coincidence. The enemy had identified the case, the flight logs, the key to her parents' legacy. "Raptor 1, she commanded, voice steady despite her racing heart. "Anticipate climb. Intercept from above. Raptor 2, flank and block lateral approach. Maintain forward wedge. Do not let it breach formation." The Raptors executed with deadly precision. Maddie's heart pounded as the intruder approached. Its speed was frightening, its movements intelligent, almost prescient. But she had the advantage of prediction, training, and instinct passed down from her parents. She could anticipate its every maneuver. A sudden flare erupted from the intruder, blinding sunlight reflected off the cockpit glass. Maddie pressed herself against the wall, feeling the vibration through the floor. The commercial plane shuddered violently. Passengers screamed, gripping armrests wide-eyed. But Maddie remained calm, calculating trajectories and adjusting commands in real time. "Raptors," she whispered urgently, "counterflare maneuvers now. Lead, climb sharply. Secondary, wedge rear intercept. Keep it away from the plane." Outside, the F-22s responded flawlessly. The intruder adjusted, banking sharply to avoid the wedge, momentarily disoriented. Maddie's pulse surged. She had prevented disaster, but she knew this was only the beginning. The cockpit crackled with tension. The first officer muttered, I can't believe what's happening. You're controlling elite fighter jets, predicting enemy moves. It's impossible." Maddie didn't respond. Her eyes scanned the clouds again, looking for any subtle change in patterns, any faint signature of another approach. She could feel it. The enemy was adapting, learning. The intruders weren't amateurs. They were precise, methodical, and deadly. A sudden shift in air pressure made the plane lurch. Maddie's stomach dropped. The lead Raptor reacted instantly, banking sharply to block the intruder's next move. Maddie adjusted her commands almost instinctively. Lead, force vertical climb. Secondary, maintain rear wedge. Do not let them break formation. The intruder faltered, forced to climb above the wedge, its trajectory momentarily compromised. Maddie allowed herself a brief, controlled exhale. She had predicted the movement, coordinated the defense, and safeguarded the plane. But she remained vigilant. The intruder could recover, and when it did, the danger would be even greater. The metallic case in her backpack seemed to hum louder, as if reacting to the tension in the cockpit. Maddie pressed her hands against it, feeling the weight of responsibility, the legacy of her parents, and the lives depending on her. She was no longer a child traveling alone. She was Echo 5 Keen, recognized by the nation's most elite pilots, commanding the defense of hundreds of lives in the air. Suddenly, the intruder executed a daring maneuver, banking sharply to the right, attempting to split the Raptor's formation. Maddie's pulse quickened. This was the moment she had anticipated, the decisive move that would test every calculation, every instinct. "Raptors," she whispered, voice steady but urgent, "final wedge intercept. Lead, cut above and hold vertical pressure. Secondary, block lateral flank. Maintain formation. Protect the plane at all costs." The F-22s executed with flawless precision. The intruder was caught in the wedge, forced to climb sharply, its path diverted away from the plane. Maddie's chest heaved with adrenaline. She had orchestrated the defense, anticipated the enemy's maneuvers, and ensured the safety of everyone on board. The cabin erupted with murmurs and gasps. Passengers had witnessed the drama outside, unaware of the intelligence, instinct, and authority behind the movements. They saw jets, speed, and maneuvering, but they didn't know a 13-year-old girl had orchestrated it all. Maddie's hands lingered on the metallic case. The threat had been repelled, but she knew it wouldn't be long before the intruders returned, smarter, faster, more determined. She pressed her lips together, steeling herself for what was next. Somewhere in the sky, beyond the clouds, eyes were watching, calculating, waiting. And Maddie knew, without a doubt, that the next confrontation would demand every ounce of courage, every shred of training, and every instinct she possessed. She wasn't just a kid in seat 11F anymore. She was the guardian of her parents' legacy. She was Echo 5 Keen, and the sky had acknowledged her authority. But as she glanced at the horizon, Maddie realized the fight was far from over. The intruders were out there. They were calculating, adapting, and they would strike again. And when they did, the battle above the clouds would reach its most dangerous, most desperate moment yet. The sky above the clouds shimmered with tension, a silent battlefield stretching as far as Maddie could see. The intruders had regrouped, their presence palpable even without visual confirmation. Maddie's pulse thudded in her chest as she pressed her forehead to the cockpit window, scanning for any subtle movement, any hint of an approach. "Miss Keene," the first officer said, voice tight, "we've detected multiple contacts approaching. They're coordinated. This isn't just one aircraft, they've brought reinforcements." Maddie's small hands tightened around the metallic case in her backpack. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing against her chest, not just her life, but every passenger, every crew member, and the legacy of her parents. The encrypted flight logs weren't just information. They were a key that could destabilize powerful forces. And now, the enemy knew she carried it. Her eyes scanned the horizon, analyzing the cloud patterns, the subtle shifts in wind, the faint shadows of fast-moving aircraft. Raptor 1, flank above and hold high cover. Raptor 2, maintain rear intercept. Both, anticipate multiple approaches. Do not let them breach formation. The F-22 pilots responded instantly. Their sleek black silhouettes moved in perfect synchronization, cutting through the clouds with lethal grace. Maddie's pulse raced, but her mind was focused, calculating every angle, every vector, every potential threat. She wasn't just a child anymore. She was a strategist, guiding elite pilots through a deadly dance in the sky. The cabin behind them was tense. Passengers pressed their faces to the windows, smartphones raised, whispering, pointing. "Are those fighter jets ours?" one woman asked nervously. "What's happening?" Maddie ignored them, focusing on the threat. She knew the intruders were calculating, adapting, and they would strike with precision. She pressed a finger to the metal tag on her backpack, activating a subtle encryption sequence. The metallic case hummed faintly, a reminder of the intelligence she carried and the danger it represented. "Miss Keene," the first officer said, voice shaking slightly, how can anyone anticipate this?" Maddie's lips pressed into a thin line. "Observation, training, instinct, focus. You can't react to them, you have to anticipate them." She traced the trajectory of the intruders in her mind, predicting movements based on patterns she had memorized from her parents' flight logs. Each subtle tilt, each shift in speed, each banking maneuver told a story, and she was reading it perfectly. Suddenly, a shadow flashed across the plain. One of the intruders was closing in fast, banking sharply toward the left rear quadrant. Maddie's stomach dropped. "Raptor 2, intercept immediately. Lead, maintain forward wedge. Do not let it breach the plane." The Raptors responded with flawless precision. The intruder faltered under the coordinated maneuver, forced to adjust trajectory midair. Maddie's chest heaved with adrenaline, but she remained steady, eyes scanning for the next threat. The first officer whispered, "I've never seen anything like this. You're directing them like a seasoned commander, and you're a kid." Maddie didn't respond. Her focus was on survival, strategy, and protection. She could see patterns emerging. The intruders were trying to isolate the plane, break the wedge, and get close enough to the metallic case. She pressed her lips together, knowing that even the slightest hesitation could be disastrous. "Raptor 1, she whispered, Anticipate climb and force the intruder high. Raptor 2 wedge rear intercept. Keep it contained. Protect the plane. Outside, the F-22s executed the maneuvers flawlessly. Maddie's mind raced with possibilities, calculating angles, velocities, and escape paths. The intruder's movements were erratic, clever, adaptive, but predictable if observed closely. Maddie had learned to read such patterns from her parents' encrypted mission files, and now those lessons were saving lives in real time. The intruder released a flare, blinding sunlight reflecting across the cockpit. The commercial plane shuddered, passengers screamed, and adrenaline surged through Maddie's veins. She pressed herself against the wall, heart racing, and whispered, "Counterflare maneuvers now. Lead climb sharply. Secondary wedge rear intercept." The F-22s responded instantly. The intruder faltered, its path compromised, and Maddie allowed herself a brief exhale. She had predicted its moves, coordinated the defense, and ensured the safety of everyone on board. But she remained vigilant. This was far from over. Another shadow appeared, a third aircraft even faster approaching from above and behind. Maddie's pulse spiked. They were attempting a coordinated strike, likely intending to overwhelm the Raptor's defenses. She swallowed hard, calculating, anticipating, and issuing commands almost instinctively. Raptor's dual intercept: lead, climb, and cut above. Secondary, maintain rear wedge and anticipate lateral flank. Do not let any breach occur. The F-22s adjusted seamlessly, forming a protective envelope around the commercial plane. Maddie's small frame pressed against the cockpit wall as she observed, her mind a blur of calculations, threat assessments, and tactical maneuvers. Each second felt like an eternity. Each decision could mean life or death. The cabin erupted into whispers and gasps. Passengers had witnessed the deadly ballet outside but remained unaware of the authority and intelligence guiding it. Maddie's hands lingered on the metallic case, feeling its weight, the responsibility, and the danger it represented. Suddenly, the intruder closest to the plane made a daring maneuver, diving sharply toward the fuselage, aiming for the rear where Maddie's backpack rested. The commercial plane shuddered violently as the turbulence intensified. Passengers screamed, gripping armrests. Maddie's chest tightened, but she remained focused, issuing commands without hesitation. Raptor 1, intercept vertical climb. Secondary, wedge lateral approach. Protect the plane at all costs. The lead F-22 responded, forcing the intruder to adjust mid-air, narrowly avoiding collision. The secondary Raptor reinforced the rear, blocking the intruder's path. Maddie's pulse surged with adrenaline, but she remained calm, every calculation precise. The first officer muttered, awe in his voice, "You're incredible. I've never seen anyone do this ever. And you're 13. Maddie pressed her lips together. Age doesn't matter. Focus does. Precision does. Observation does. The intruders, realizing they could not breach the protective formation, veered slightly, regrouping for another attempt. Maddie's mind raced, anticipating every possible move. She could sense their calculation, their strategy, their intent. They wanted the metallic case, her parents' final mission logs, and they would not stop until they had it. Her hands hovered over her backpack strap, ready for any eventuality. She wasn't just a child in seat 11F anymore. She was Echo 5 keen, recognized, respected, and fully engaged in a high-stakes battle that stretched across the sky. The metallic case hummed faintly against her chest, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Maddie's eyes scanned the clouds again, analyzing every shadow, every subtle movement. The intruders were adapting, learning, and plotting their next strike. And Maddie knew, with chilling clarity, that the next move would be their most dangerous yet. The sky held its breath, the intruders waited, and Maddie, small but unyielding, braced herself for the coming storm. Because the final confrontation was about to begin, the sky seemed to hold its breath. Clouds stretched endlessly, painted in the pale gold of late afternoon sunlight. Maddie pressed her forehead to the cockpit window, heart hammering. She could sense them now, the intruders closing in faster, sharper, more precise than ever. Their formation was flawless, their intent clear: reach the plane, seize the metallic case, erase the last traces of her parents' work. She adjusted her grip on the backpack, feeling the weight of history pressing against her chest. Her parents' legacy, their final mission logs, her own survival, all were on this line. Every instinct she had, every lesson drilled into her from years of clandestine training, coalesced into a singular focus: protect the plane, protect the passengers, protect the truth. Raptor 1, Raptor 2, she said, voice steady, commanding, authoritative. Final intercept. Maintain wedge. Anticipate multiple approaches. Do not let any intruder breach formation. Protect the plane, protect the case. The F-22s responded instantly, banking with a precision that made Maddie's chest tighten in simultaneous awe and terror. The lead jet cut high, creating a protective shield above, while the secondary flanked the rear, ready to intercept any lateral maneuver. Maddie's calculations raced in tandem with the pilot's movements, each second critical. The intruders accelerated, banking sharply toward the commercial plane. Maddie's pulse surged. She pressed herself against the cockpit wall, eyes locked on their approach. The first officer beside her whispered, "They're coordinated. How do you?" "Observe," Maddie said quietly. "Predict, react, do not give them a chance." The intruders attempted a feint, banking left, then diving sharply toward the plane's rear. Maddie's stomach twisted. She pressed her finger to the metal tag on her backpack, activating the subtle encryption hum of the metallic case. This was more than data. It was a signal, a safeguard, and a challenge to any who dared approach. Raptor 1, intercept high. Lead, push vertical. Raptor 2, wedge rear. Do not allow breach, she commanded. The lead F-22 shot upward, cutting the intruder's trajectory. The secondary reinforced the rear wedge, forcing another intruder to adjust its path. Maddie's eyes narrowed. She could sense patterns now: the intruders attempt to isolate her plane and overwhelm the formation. They underestimated her, or perhaps they underestimated a child capable of orchestrating aerial combat at this level. The cabin shuddered violently as turbulence from the maneuvers rippled through the fuselage. Passengers screamed, clutching armrests. Maddie ignored them, focusing on the sky, reading every subtle shadow, every shift in the clouds. "Miss Keene," the first officer muttered, voice tight, "I don't know how you're doing this." "No one should be able to," he trailed off, unable to finish. Maddie didn't respond. Her gaze was locked on the intruders, tracking every micro-movement. She could see the next feint coming. The intruders were testing, probing, trying to draw the Raptors out of position. Her instincts kicked in. Lead, anticipate left flanking. Secondary, maintain wedge and block lateral maneuver. Hold formation. The F-22s responded with lethal precision. The intruders faltered, unable to reach the plane. Maddie allowed herself a brief exhale. She had anticipated their next move, orchestrated the defense, and protected the plane. But she knew the fight wasn't over. Then came the signal. A subtle tilt of the lead Raptor's wings, a barely perceptible nod through the canopy: recognition, respect, astonishment. The pilots understood now what they were witnessing. Maddie was not just a child. She was Echo 5 Keene, the inheritor of a legacy, the guardian of intelligence, the orchestrator of survival. A sudden flash in the clouds, a final, desperate strike from the intruders. They dove sharply, banking toward the commercial plane's rear. Maddie's pulse surged. This was the decisive moment. She pressed a hand over the metallic case, whispering, "Not today." Raptor 1, climb and cut above. Raptor 2, wedge rear intercept. Protect the plane at all costs. The F-22s moved with breathtaking precision. The intruders were forced to adjust mid-air, narrowly missing the fuselage. Maddie's chest heaved with adrenaline, but she remained focused, observing, calculating, commanding. The intruders faltered, splitting into separate maneuvers trying to flank the formation. Maddie's mind raced. She anticipated each adjustment, each tilt, each acceleration. Lead, maintain vertical wedge. Secondary, block lateral approach. Keep them contained. The Raptors responded flawlessly, forcing the intruders to climb and retreat. The commercial plane leveled, passengers still shaken but intact. Maddie exhaled, a tremor running through her body. She had done it. She had survived. She had protected everyone. The first officer leaned back, pale, trembling, staring at her. I don't know what to say. You. Maddie shook her head. There's nothing to say. We survived, that's enough. Outside, the sky was quiet, the intruders retreating beyond the cloud line. Maddie watched them disappear, knowing they would not stop entirely, but that for now the threat was neutralized. The metallic case hummed faintly, secure, intact. Her parents' legacy remained protected. The lead Raptor banked slightly, signaling acknowledgement, then broke formation to return to base. The secondary followed. Maddie allowed herself a brief smile. She had done it. The impossible had been accomplished. The first officer exhaled slowly, shaking his head. You saved all of us, all of us. No one expected. Maddie's eyes softened, looking around at the passengers, the crew, the chaos they had survived. I didn't do it alone, she said quietly. The pilots helped. We all survived together. The captain nodded, still pale but steadying himself. Miss Keene, Echo 5 Keene, you are extraordinary. You've shown courage, intelligence, and authority beyond your years. You've earned respect in ways most adults could only dream of. Maddie's lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't looking for praise. She was focused, alert, aware that the world outside was still dangerous. But for the first time, she allowed herself a flicker of relief, a hint of pride. She had risen to the challenge. She had honored her parents. She had protected the legacy they had entrusted to her. Passengers began murmuring, some filming, some whispering in awe. They saw only a child on a plane, but in reality, she had commanded elite fighter jets, outmaneuvered a coordinated assault, and preserved secrets that powerful forces would have killed to obtain. Maddie's small hands lingered on the metallic case. Its hum was faint, steady, a reminder of what she carried and what she had protected. She closed her eyes briefly, exhaling, letting herself feel the weight of survival, the responsibility fulfilled, the terror overcome. Somewhere beyond the clouds, eyes still watched. Calculations were made, threats recalculated, but Maddie knew one thing with certainty: she had proven herself. She had earned the recognition of the most elite pilots in the nation. She had survived when few would have. She wasn't just a kid in seat 11F anymore. She was a guardian, a strategist, a legacy in motion. Echo 5 Keene had arrived. And for now, the sky was hers. The commercial plane leveled, engine steady, clouds breaking into light. Maddie took a deep breath, allowing herself a rare moment of calm. Her pulse slowed, her mind cleared, and she looked at the horizon. The battle had been won. The passengers were safe. The metallic case remained secure. But Maddie knew this was only the beginning. Challenges would come again, threats would return, and she would be ready. Because she was Echo 5 Keene. And no one, not even the most precise, deadly adversaries in the sky, would underestimate her again. The clouds parted, sunlight streaming through, glinting off the metallic case, catching in her eyes. She smiled faintly. The sky was vast, dangerous, and unpredictable, but so was she. And this time, the world knew exactly who was in command. The end.